and welcome everybody to the Forest Stewards Guild career call. This is the third time we have hosted one of these in recent years, and I'm just really glad to see everybody here. Thanks for spending a little time in your evening with us. And if we could just go around and do a quick round of introductions. We'd like to hear who you are, how you're affiliated with the Guild, if at all, and where you either work or attend an academic institution. And I think I'm just going to go through my little screens here and call on folks. So feel free to pass. That's always a valid answer as well. But let's start with Tish and then move on to, is it Shinya Burke?
Shania, yeah.
Shania, thank you.
Thanks, Colleen. I'm Tish Carr. I'm in the middle of a snowstorm in the great state of Maine, which is kind of exciting considering it's April 8th or 9th, 8th, I guess it is. And I am a licensed forester and licensed arborist. I've spent my career the majority of the time doing community forestry and arboriculture. I have spent the last 12 years in academia. I do have a master's in forestry and a PhD in ecology and environmental science. And I'm still sort of working with the University of Maine, but also crazy looking for a job. So anyway, that's me.
Thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry, and I'm affiliated with Forest Steward Guild through WOW, Women Only Woodlands. I do a lot of chainsaw training, as well as I'm on NPC, Membership and Policy Committee. Sorry, I forgot that one thing.
Thank you, Tish.
Nice to meet you, Tish, and good to see you all. My name's Shania Burke. I'm making sure I'm off mute. I live in Santa Fe, New Mexico. I currently work for the New Mexico Environment Department as a wetland scientist and project manager. And I'm also attending school at the University of Idaho for my master's in natural resource management. And I'm learning about fire ecology through their certification there. I know about the Forest Steward Guild through just some community events. We had the annual fire conference, Southwest Fire Conference here. I don't know when that was, but 6 months ago maybe. And yeah, I'm a student member with the Guild, so I'm happy to be here and learn more about all of this.
Lovely, thank you. Let's go to Shanda and then Andrew, please.
Hi everyone, my name is Shanda. I am the Pacific Northwest Region Coordinator. I'm based out of Canby, Oregon, which is just outside of Portland. And I've been with the Guild for 1 year. My work primarily focuses on our Forestry for the Birds program, and I also help to host a lot of educational events that bring students, researchers, professionals, etc. together.
Hey y'all, my name is Andrew Pearson. I work for the Forest Stewards Guild in the Southwest region. I'm in Albuquerque, but work out of the Santa Fe office. I am neither a student nor a career forester, so I'm not terribly helpful here. But I run the Forest Stewards Guild Youth Conservation Corps in the summer and fall across New Mexico. So just hoping to glean some wisdom from you all about how I can better tailor that conservation corps program to benefit folks who are into forestry or want to head down that path, or are even just like tangentially interested in it academically.
Thank you both. Let's move on to Kayla and then Zoe, please.
Alrighty, hi, I'm Kayla, obviously. I actually have no affiliation with the Guild, but I am currently in school for environmental science and sustainability. I'm about to finish up my junior year at Stockton University. And there's big conservation. We live, like, our campus is on a huge acreage of the Pineland Conservation Area, so we have a lot of affiliation through all that jazz. So that's how I found out about the Guild, basically just through my professors.
Hey there. I'm also a student. I'm a graduate student at Cal Poly Humboldt in natural resources. Hoping to get into forestry. I'm coming from farming, so I'm super new to all this, but loving it. And I'm not a student member yet, but I plan to here soon. I'm actually defending later this week, and I found an issue with my model, so I might be tapping off this whole call early, but I'm here to learn as much as I can. So thank you.
Thank you both. Let's go Mackenzie, then Adam, then Roger.
Hi, everyone. I'm the Southeast coordinator with the Guild. I'm based out of Asheville, North Carolina. And so my role right now is mostly doing event coordinating, webinar coordinating through the Guild. So I've just hosted 3 chainsaw training workshops, similar to the work that you do, Tish, which is pretty awesome to hear from all the way up in Maine. I'd love to pick your brain about some things maybe down the line. And yeah, just trying to connect landowners, professionals, students all together to the Guild and their forests around them.
Adam, are you with us and can you hear us? All right, we'll give Adam a moment. Roger, you want to go ahead?
Can you hear me okay?
Sure can.
Okay, I'm Roger Merchant from Bangor, Maine. Been a member of the Guild for about 15 years. My forestry career started in 1965. I worked managing 100,000 acres of timberland for the first 7 years. And then I got caught up in some changes and got a master's in social work community development. And then I came back to Maine in 1980, went to work for Humane Cooperative Extension in Piscataquis County, did forestry education, nature-based tourism development, adventure-based learning for kids and for adults, and a lot of things like that. And I retired back in 2013. And I'm a free human being, but I'm working my butt off. And I do a lot of photography work and things like that. And I'm interested in the conversation tonight about what are the possibilities.
Thank you so much. I just want to acknowledge that Adam mentioned in the chat some trouble with the microphone and video. So if you would like to introduce yourself in the chat, feel free. Also, not an obligation.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Great.
Okay. I don't think I have video, but at least I can talk.
Okay.
So my name is Adam. I'm not affiliated with any of this. Actually, I just learned about it recently. I'm also going to Stockton University as a student. But for me, it's a little different because I actually got a degree about 20 years ago in music, and I'm going back now. So it's like a career change. So I want to go back for forestry, and I'm just basically at this point kind of like learning all about the things to do to get there, basically.
Great. Well, thank you all for sharing that. Gives us a little bit of sense who's in the room. And I think we can just dig right into some of these questions. One that I think this might have been you, Roger, but somebody on our professionals side of things put forth this first question reflecting on your unique role and asked, students sort of to challenge themselves to think about and reflect on trees and forestry. What immediately comes to your mind and how do you see yourself in this triad? And certainly we can create space for you to answer that question if you'd like. If you don't want to voice an answer, it's, I think, a really nice one to just reflect on internally and over time. So I'll just pause for a moment and see if there's anybody who'd like to share anything about thoughts from this question. But if not, we'll move on to get some of the more specific Q&A in.
I this might be a little off of what the question was supposed to intend, but I just thought of people who are well steeped in the forestry community and have been working as foresters for a long time. As myself, being a new person trying to get into this world, what does it like really look like? You know, like whenever you think about forestry, like, and your regular day-to-day job, what are you typically thinking of? What are you doing?
Great question. We can jump in with that. If Tish or Roger or anybody else has an answer they want to share. What's a forestry job look like?
I don't know,
I
Mike.
think,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
oh, go ahead, Roger. It's harder because you don't have a screen. Go ahead.
Yeah, I know, I can't figure out how to get my ugly face up there. Jeez, that's okay. I don't know. I've witnessed the trees forest and forestry over however many years it is now, since 1965. And what it is now and what it was then, there was some similarities, but I think there's items I've been seeing in the last 10 years from my retired seat, some changes in people's interests in trees, forests, and forestry. And it's the way I frame it is, I believe it's moving beyond the old cords and logs model, which was strictly about harvesting, selling timber, and that kind of thing, which is a part of the whole. But I think there's been there's a piece that Karen Tilbig from the Forest Society of Maine put out recently about how conservation has altered the landscape, for example, in the state of Maine, and landscape and ownership that way. So I think there's more diversity of possibilities that are embracing more things like conservation easements, like land trusts, like wildlife habitat, and things like that. And I think that's different now. More options.
Yeah, I would concur. I was going to say similar things and my career hasn't been that, I've only been at it since the mid 80s, but there's been a definite shift in the priorities of how to manage the lands. And I think that's why it's been so great to be involved with actually the Forest Steward Guild, because it's a more of a global perspective and not so much of a timber driven perspective. And there is so much more, like when I was in forestry school, and I don't know, Roger, if you went to University of Maine at Orono.
Yeah.
You did? Well, we probably had, I mean, probably had some of the same teachers, but anyway, some were there for a long time, but it was really black and white. There was no like gray area, and I think there's a lot more diversity, as Roger said, and there's a lot more ability to do, to understand how things are connected versus, timber is just a commodity. How fast can we grow the trees and how quickly can we cut them down, which was the model that I had when I was in school. And I think Roger had it as well. I mean, it's really not about that. And I think that diversity that we now are seeing is helping. And it broadens out a lot of possibilities. And I think it makes it also more accessible for women to enjoy forestry rather than having this typical perception of what a forester is, because it's a broader vision, which I think is great. I mean, there's not a lot of women foresters. There's more now than there were, but I think it gives that opportunity that may not have been there 30 years ago or 40 years ago. So I think that that's good as well. But it's really more about the diversity, and it's kind of interesting I will say the one little bit of a drawback is that with all the technology, you're not getting out in boots on the ground as much, because there's so much you can do now sitting in front of a computer rather than like, I mean, I actually went into wildlife first, but then I ended up getting a double major in forestry as an undergrad. And I wanted to be the boots on the ground person. And it's really interesting that it's not a whole lot of boots on the ground anymore, because you can do so much sitting in front of a computer. So I don't know. There's pluses and minuses to it. I kind of wish there'd be a little bit more boots on the ground, but there's nothing bad with the technology either.
I appreciate what you're saying there, and it made me reflect back on my early career about boots on the ground learning. I learned some things in forestry school, that's true, but there was a heck of a lot I didn't know. And I've done some writing about my early years, and what I found was after I got out of forestry school, where and who I learned from were the people that worked in the woods. It was primarily men in those days, granted, but the men who were from rural Maine, they were generous with their knowledge. There was a lot of things I didn't know about operations, let alone marking timber and scaling timber and managing the whole of the operation. So there was lots to be learned from local people. I don't know if that exists anymore or not. And I hear your point too, Tish, about there's a lot of time spent modeling through the computer aspect, which is important too.
I also want to chime in to speak to the nonprofit forestry sector. This isn't really where I had imagined that I would end up when I was in school, and I'm really glad that I ended up here. And it is a very unique space to be working in. I'm sure all of us that work for the Guild would have very different things to say in terms of what our jobs actually look like and what our roles are. So it's pretty multifaceted, but generally speaking, we're applying for funding and you get to kind of come up with your project that you want to fulfill with this funding that you might potentially get. So there's a lot of room to pursue your own passions and interests within this space. And so you can potentially be doing a lot of field work. I personally haven't been. Maybe someday I will, we'll see. But it's really interesting. The work that I do is so much bringing people together for sharing knowledge, and I've learned so much, and I've gotten to know so many really incredible, intelligent, impressive people through this work. And I've got to sit in the room with a lot of people having really important conversations and be part of those conversations. And I think this is a really great place to learn and grow in forestry.
I'd love to follow up after Shanna if you guys don't mind. Something to think about too is that the general public typically thinks of forestry as everything about your forest from a sprout to the logging mill. So there's a wide range within that, right? Whether it's boots on the ground, whether it's consulting, whether it's policy, figuring out kind of the niche that you want to go into. I knew I wanted to go into education right away, but when I first got into the forestry field, I was a boots on the ground field team in a state halfway across the country that I didn't even know any of that ecosystem and I had to learn it in the moment. Once I got in my boots wet and figured out the ecosystems I was managing, then I could get into the consulting. But then folks were misunderstanding, like, I'm a forest health specialist at this point now. I can tell you how to focus on invasive plants, when to implement fire, when to do a thinning. I can tell you all that, but that doesn't mean that I can go out and do all that physical manual labor myself as well. Like I may be able to give you very good guidance, but I'm not an arborist at the end of the day either. That's a completely different ball game. So kind of figuring out if you want to be a jack of all trades or if you want to be a very specific topic specialist, I think that's something good to start thinking about. Or if you don't even want to be a full-on jack of all trades and more of a specialist, having that background understanding of those other trades that may be involved in other topics is going to be huge, where you can show that it's an interconnected thing. One thing I really found at the end of the day too was that while we're managing forests, we're really managing people. And so working on those interpersonal skills, whether you're working with a landowner that just has been on the property for generations, or you're working with another forester that's been in the field for a long time or is very green, there's got to be ways that everyone has to work together to get projects actually completed. And so having those personal skills with the people that you're working with that are to do forest management are really important.
Thank you all for sharing that. I want to echo what Mackenzie just said about interpersonal skills, being able to meet people where they are. It's something that has come up on every career call that we've done, with an encouragement from our professional members around that. Sometimes there's stereotypes in professions, and one of them that has lived in forestry for a while is that folks that are wanting to be in the woods don't necessarily want to be on a computer. They don't necessarily want to be with a ton of other people. I don't know that that's true for every individual, but at the end of the day, it is true that you do work with others, either partnering organizations or interdisciplinary across expertise, and also with the landowners and land managers where the work is getting done. So I completely agree with what Mackenzie shared there, and just want to point out that I put this in chat too. The Guild has been in this space for our entire 30 years of bringing ecological forestry to the foreground, which is sort of what we're talking about here, versus the timber-based perspective only, and pulling forestry into more of a balanced space where, yes, we think about timber and forest products. We also think about how do forests interact and impact water resources and habitat for wildlife and birds, and how do the soils in our forests play a role in all of that. So I encourage you to think about being able to interact with forestry, even if you aren't a forester or interested in becoming the person in the woods who does the work with the Biltmore stick and the work to figure out percent canopy cover and all the details around the forest aspect specifically.
That interactiveness is so important. I got my master's in social work, so I really got a bath in that, and a radical change from forestry back in the day. And that's where I began to see how this applies to individuals, couples, families, relationships, and communities. And when I think about forestry now and trees, people are very much connected to this in a lot of different ways, and being able to hear what their values are, what matters to them, like kind of what we're going through here, and talking about what matters to you in terms of placing yourself into the woods or into the computer, or with a family who's trying to figure out what to do with the 10 acres, right? There's just a lot to it, and the interaction underpins it as much as the ecology does.
So I'd like to move us on. Anybody on the call recognize question number 2?
Could you read that one? I can't seem to get to my other file.
It is, I'm a master's student in natural resources with a forestry concentration, but have limited field experience and was not able to take foundational courses like dendrology, plant taxonomy, forest economics. What are some ways in which you have continued your education after leaving school? So
That'd be
go ahead.
me. Oh, that was my question.
Perfect. Anything more you want to add to that before we give some thoughts?
Think so. Yeah, just like looking for ways. It doesn't have to be certification courses or whatnot, but just different ways that people have furthered their education.
I'm going to jump in on this because this is exactly what happened to me. So I got my bachelor's and master's degree in natural resources management and focusing in forestry and extension from North Dakota State. And then I had moved all the way to Asheville, North Carolina to be closer to family. But at the end of the day, prairie state of North Dakota is a lot different than the Appalachian Mountains of North Carolina. And that being said, North Carolina in itself has a variety of mountain ecosystems all the way to coastal, right? So I had to hone in and be like, okay, I can't take the whole state on. That's just not an option. But getting into a field team as a tech was like the fastest way for me to learn a completely new ecosystem, boots on the ground. My coworkers are there right next to me. They can point out all these invasive plants that I need to focus on because it was an invasive control team specifically. And we did some forest management practices, whether it was thinning along those lines. And I learned a lot of that boots on the ground, just getting dirty. In North Dakota, I was mostly looking at shelter belts and windbreaks, and they were all experimental plantings of these saplings that I was evaluating their health. And so completely different involvement level, had to learn how to use the backpack sprayer, how to use my chainsaw in general, got that experience on that field team. Looking for I was really, really lucky that it was who I knew that got me into that role, not so much of what I knew. I had applied for over a dozen forestry jobs in Western North Carolina and could not land something for about 6 months. But because I was starting to volunteer with local organizations like the Carolina Mountain Club, where they do trail work, starting to get involved with um, just certain friends that were and like organizations that were more involved with forestry, whether it was through the Wildlife Society, just trying all of those other networking options that I knew had existed, but more locally. And then that eventually built up my street cred per se for a local organization to be like, okay, hey, wait, so she's not just a full on beginner anymore. Even though she has her master's degree, that's great and dandy, but it's from a state halfway across the country. So now we have applicable skills that she can actually apply. And I started as a field tech, moved up to a field lead, and then within a year I was a consultant because I had gotten that boots on the ground experience so that I could actually go consult landowners a lot better, seeing how I knew the plants. I knew the management strategies to a degree from a different state, but I never took a dendrology class. Like that was something I had to put in a lot of active effort. I had note cards that I had printed out on a little keychain that I'd keep out in the field. I was constantly asking all the experts on my team that were out there with me of what's this plant, why does it do what? Like how is it part of this ecosystem network that we're working in? And that got me to where I am today. So that if that's any guidance on like how to start, that it's just getting dirty and starting with those volunteer organizations if you can't land a job in the field that you want right away.
I agree with what Mackenzie said, and my experience is different from hers, whereas I worked in the same place that I got my education, but still going into those entry-level jobs, I found that they didn't really expect me to know a ton beyond the basics. Typically, they do really, my experience was that they really wanted me to know my tree IDs. That was kind of the big thing. And so I would say if you haven't taken dendrology, that is a good thing to kind of do some independent study on. But apart from that, you learn so much on the job, and that's kind of the expectation as a new or early career person. It's not expected that you know a ton, that you're coming in with a ton of knowledge, just that you're going to work hard and that you have enthusiasm and want to be there.
At that time, I hung around foresters in the Maine woods and the deciduous forest, particularly. Foresters would take issue one another about was that a red maple or was that a sugar maple? Because sometimes they just weren't that clear, and sometimes they're really clear, right? I see heads nodding. Yes, there's something to this. But the point being, there's the informal mentorship that could go on like that. And I'm wondering too, in some of the ideas I'm hearing you all bring out in terms of learning beyond just what you've got in your degree program, maybe there's room for informal networks where folks like you gather together, say, hey, here's what I need some help with figuring out, and that kind of mentorship, that kind of peer culture, I think could have some application on some of the questions that come up that need some attention for what it's worth.
I might chime in, sorry, one more time real quick. I will let you know, I was very frustrated. I had my master's degree and I was getting a tech position, right? I was like that. Granted, I moved halfway across the country. Yes, I don't know this ecosystem. Yes, but I still have the educational credits to back up like what I can do. And for the first 2 years, I was just kicking myself for getting my master's. And now, in hindsight, I didn't know the boots on the ground, so I couldn't. The education only got me so far, but having that field experience brought me to that next level, which then was able to like skyrocket me up a little bit faster. But until I got that field experience, that education was great and dandy, but like folks needed to see I could walk the walk and talk the talk, not just do one or the other.
If I can ask, when you were taking your formal courses, whether it was undergraduate or graduate in natural resources forestry, was there much boots on the ground teaching and learning in those? None, not much.
There was for
No.
me.
Yeah.
There was for me, and I was not in forestry specifically. I had a forestry class, I had a soils class, I had a fisheries and water class. And every one of those classes had field components.
Colleen, when did you get your master's, if you don't mind my asking?
Those classes were actually for my bachelor's degree, and it was early 2000s. But also at one of the nation's renowned forestry schools and natural resources schools at University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point.
My experience at Oregon State University was that there was a lot of field experience there as well. And we were also required to get X amount of hours working in the field. So I did an internship every summer as a field tech.
I just went into the wrong major for my school. If I was in animal science, wildlife biology, soil science, range science, any of that, I would have been hands deep in a lot of experience, but forestry just was not the focus for North Dakota State for obvious reasons.
Yeah, I think a lot of it just plays into where you went and did your undergrad or graduate work. But I know there's not, I mean, there's a lot less field boots on the ground now at University of Maine than there was earlier, 30 years ago. There really isn't. They cut their summer. You used to have to go to 6 weeks of summer camp, and now it's down to a week. And I think people are working, but it's also not quite the same. So it's just, times are changing. And I think some folks feel like you don't need that boots on the ground. So I don't think, Mackenzie, your experience is all that uncommon as well.
So sorry to jump in, but from a current student, I know Adam can back me up, we're in the same classes, but for Stockton, it's actually built into our forest management plan to allow us to have as much opportunity as possible to have boots on the ground education, hands-on experience within our forest. Like basically, I would probably say the top 3 goals within our current forest management plan for just the Pinelands specifically is to prioritize education and community engagement, basically. So I don't know if that's something different, I guess, from other people's experience, but hopefully, maybe, I don't know if you think that could help me. Maybe I can't imagine it harming me, but I don't know how that's going to translate into the workforce.
So I think this is a really good segue, Kayla. Thanks for that. There's a question here. What were some graduate courses which were most valuable to your professional forestry career and why? And I'm guessing that things like along the lines of what you were mentioning might be on the top of the list for some folks. But why? Can we talk about a little bit more where the value is in those experiences and others? So again, the question was, what were some graduate courses which were most valuable to your professional forestry career and why?
Well, I got one. My career path is different, granted, but for graduate courses, the basis of my graduate work in social work and community development was human behavior in the social environment. And we got into activities, we got into theories and ideas about conflict management, about effective, ineffective communication. So I Even though I, for a period of time, changed my direction from forestry directly, those kind of courses filled in something that I really needed filled inside of me. And that I say that in a clear way. It helped me personally in my communications with people, but it also helped inform my relationships with other people external just to me in terms of groups, working with groups, in terms of communities, working with communities. I did some work in parenting education back in the day, so consciously I consciously picked courses that way, and that was of some help to me. And I've had moments here and there, and I thought, boy, it'd be nice if they would put together a 1 semester course on something like that related to communication and engagement with forestry, trees, and people.
Thank you, Roger.
Yeah, I'm going to circle back to what Mackenzie said in the sense that anything that you can take that has to do with interpersonal relationships is really important, because and what Colleen said, because at least I know, and again, my undergraduate was in a different century, but I just did finish up my graduate work, so I kind of have this spectrum of, one era versus another era, but there isn't, that interpersonal stuff is so important, and you don't typically get it, whether it's community forestry or traditional forestry, or whatever forestry realm you get into. And I know when I got out with my undergraduate degree, I went into community forestry right away, and it wasn't even community forestry at that point. It was even like before that. So, but it was just the whole people relationship. And I teach now at SMCC, and I really try to get the students to understand that important relationship that the environment has with the people, and how to communicate that, because it's just not often shared. So I couldn't stress it enough. And I think, just a little FYI, that I try to encourage the students that I have is to take a break between undergrad and graduate school, and go and get some time in the field before going back to school, because it sometimes gives folks a different perspective as to what your interests are, and it helps you to be passionate about what you're doing. And I think that that's really important in this work, is just to be passionate about it, and find out what that thing is that really sparks your interest and gets you jazzed. I'll get off my soapbox.
Oh, can I jump on it?
Sure, go right for it.
I
Good soapbox.
100% agree with that perspective. I know a lot of folks want to just jump into their master's program immediately out the gates after their undergrad, and that is what I did. I went from my undergrad straight into my master's, mostly because a professor had approached me about a research project that was available and that I was a perfect fit for it. It turned out I wasn't really a perfect fit for it. But that's just because it wasn't an interest to me. Like, it was my master's program. It was a paid education because it was through a state university. So I'm not going to say no to that. But in hindsight, if I had the opportunity to take a break, get out in the field, figure out what niche I want to focus in on, and then look for the master's program that aligns better with my personal goals, I wouldn't be hitting my head against a desk when writing management plans after that. Like, my management plans became my master's thesis to me because that just wasn't my interest. I'm more interested in education. I'm more interested in outreach, bringing people in that way. But this is where I am, and now I'm still doing that. So I'm saying it's a double-edged sword either way, because I'm still in my dream job now when I thought I wasn't going to be even a year ago, and I was just going to be writing management plans for the rest of my life. But I don't want people to get spooked off of writing management plans. They're so fun and great. Some people really love them. They're just these biology nerds and dendrology nerds that just love getting into it, and that's fantastic. That just wasn't for me. And so just keep that in mind. If you have the opportunity to take a break in between and get your field experience, try it out before you commit the next 3 years to studying something that may not be as interest to you.
Thank you. Yeah, there's some questions later on about internships and fellowships as well, which we can dig into, because that might align a little bit here too. But I wanted to underscore the importance of finding community and finding experiences in various areas that you're interested in. So Mackenzie and I are both sort of more from an education communications realm. I cannot tell most tree ID in the wintertime. And I don't have the ecological knowledge to write a stewardship plan. However, I can help the planners get stewardship done. Like, that's a superpower of mine. And I've spent a lot of time on land, and I work on a lot of prescribed fire, and I have facilitated women's chainsaw safety and maintenance classes and so forth. So it's like, not that I haven't been on the ground and done work, and I was the communicator for forest health in our Department of Natural Resources in Wisconsin for 11 years. So I learned a ton about forest health, but not as much as the entomologists. My job was to try and translate that information from the scientists to the people who needed to know it and didn't know it yet. So I encourage you to find the communities of people that either directly relate to where you think you might be interested, or even who are involved in that work, but from a different lens, because that can give you a lot of information as well. And again, just encouraging you to look for resources and places to connect. The Guild is one of these places. We're a broad community with wide-ranging expertise, all somewhere kind of vacillating around forestry, but it's not a guild full of foresters. There's definitely a lot more folks in there. And I'm going to put a couple of links in the chat right now of resources that can be helpful from the Guild, but also these are the kinds of things you can look for elsewhere too. Events that you can get involved with. When we do virtual events at the Guild, we post them on our YouTube almost always. And so there's a webinar library and a YouTube channel of the Guild where you can get a ton of information. And there's also these research publications that might intersect with questions you have or things you have thought about digging into. And there's management recommendations. So there's a great wealth of information outside of classrooms as well. Just if you can connect and understand how to navigate some of these organizations that do the work on the ground and be part of those communities to make those connections. So let's jump to some of those questions around those experiences. There's one here that says, in your view, what is the value in participating in a fellowship post-graduation? And where do you recommend students search for these opportunities? And along the same lines, what about internships and possible career pathways through internships? So fellowships and internships, what do you think? What's the value of those? Where can people find out about them?
I don't have an answer, but I do have a follow-up question. So within our program at Stockton, you have to have an internship to graduate. It's a part of your requirements. And I just want to know what, kind of along to the previous question, what's the value of experiencing an internship that doesn't necessarily fully align with what your specific interests are? Like, I know a lot of times they say it's great to know what you don't want, but how truly beneficial is that when I'm trying to build a career? And I also need this requirement to graduate, you know what I mean? So
Again,
That's a thoughtful question you put out there. It's a tough one too.
yeah, I'm really feeling it as a junior about to go
Yeah.
into my senior year, especially with it being a requirement. I'm definitely feeling the pressure and trying to weigh the pros and cons of just taking an internship for the sake of taking an internship. Basically trying to figure out what types of experiences basically, or should I prioritize?
I kind of have a follow-up question that goes with it. Have you kept like a journal or anything like that that is specifically focused on if I had my druthers related to trees, using the opening question, if I had my druthers related to trees, if I had my druthers related to forests, if I had my druthers related to forestry, if I had my druthers related to forest communities, what shows up? What might come up that just by asking that open-ended question that might help in framing not just one frame, but maybe there's a couple frames there that exist that may amount to nothing in the longer term, but it may be a way of kind of from a deeper level pulling that out of you and putting that into paper in a way that you say, I haven't thought about that. Or if you do some readings about that relate to those kind of questions, that kind of imagination, even if you will, that could be some way of framing the potential content of a couple opportunities like that, fellowships. I don't know. Call on your mind. Your mind probably has some pretty good ideas about that because you're already into it now, showing up in this program and raising the question. You're already on the track.
Yeah, so I know we mentioned nonprofits earlier, and that is an ideal area for me to be in, but kind of steering a little away from the internship question. But like, I don't know about the security of that type of job in this current political climate and stuff like that. What's my future look like if I'm really trying to gear my career towards a nonprofit organization, stuff like that. So again, kind of on top of it, should I just nix that? Like, is that something, like, it's kind of all question marks right now. So I don't know if anybody has any insight on their personal experiences.
I think your political climate's probably better at the moment with a nonprofit. I just because I worked for nonprofit for many years and with municipal government, and I just think that with a nonprofit, at least my experience has been, you're a part of a team that can kind of help guide and create funding opportunities because of the people that you meet and the opportunities that are potentially there. And I don't know, the thing about nonprofits is the diversity. You sometimes you're not really, if you go and work with a municipality or with the state or with the federal government, sometimes you're kind of boxed in. Whereas if you work for a smaller organization, whether it's a nonprofit or a land trust or something like that, there's opportunities to do different things too that you might be able to experience and broaden your interest or find out what it is that you get excited about. So I mean, I really wouldn't rule out nonprofit. I probably would put that higher up than other, or even just working with a forester that you might know, or that your faculty member might know, or working well, like Mackenzie said. I mean, she did a lot of volunteer work initially just to get that boots on the ground experience, and that's a good opportunity that might be constitute an internship too if there's something that interests you. Think out of the box a little bit. It's okay to challenge the system.
I was going to say that too. I don't know exactly what the boundaries are at your institution around what constitutes an internship, but sometimes they can be similar to like almost an independent study. And if you can create it, if you can find the people to collaborate with or the partners and work together to create what your learning objectives are and what that experience is going to be, it's something that you could consider pitching to your school and your advisor and be like, look, I didn't find anything I'm interested in out there in the internship world. I worked to try and create this. Here's an opportunity. Will you help me see if this can develop into my requirement? And that's not only serving you to build local connections and maybe a program that is closer to your ideal for what you're learning, but it shows this incredible amount of initiative, which like bureaucracies are bureaucracies, and sometimes we can't give good work the credit that it deserves. But I think besides that and any constraints, it would be pretty strange for somebody to say, yeah, no, you shouldn't have put that effort in, and try to come up with an answer to your dilemma.
What both Colleen and Tish are saying is nonprofits, I think, are a little easier to get an internship with to a degree. One, there's a lot less red tape than getting like an internship through the state, through the Fed, through NRCS, even. And also nonprofits, they're already on like a relatively low budget. So any internships that they can have to help complete other works that they've got going on or side projects that they're excited about but may not have the capacity for opens up some avenues. And you won't be boxed into the nonprofit realm per se through one internship. It just gives you that experience and shows you, hey, I'm willing to put myself out there and I'm just willing to do whatever they want me to do because I have this goal at the end, right? And you could even like shop around maybe a little bit, say, it's like see what nonprofits that are forestry related in your area that you're interested in, see what kind of work they're doing. So we have like an urban forestry nonprofit here in Asheville. We have the invasive nonprofit that I used to work for. But they were a unique one where they were partial nonprofit, partial for profit. So that was very strange for the average organization. But even your local Audubon Society, like that might be another opportunity to reach out if they have an office in your area. Just, hey, I want to do an internship. I want to focus on forestry for the birds. And that's like a huge demographic right now. That would be like my suggestion out the gates. If you're able to figure out kind of along the lines of like what Colleen said, if you find a forester that is willing to let you buddy up with them and do an internship that way, and it's really shadowing and like helping them monitor certain things, and you can create your own program that way, awesome. If you're looking for a paid internship, that's going to be a little bit different, right? Like a lot of this kind of work is not going to be paid, or if it is paid, it's pretty much peanuts. I highly recommend looking at the Conservation Job Board if you're interested in moving. That's a really great resource. Or the Texas A&M Job Board is another great resource for students. Again, if you're willing to move, that's huge. If you need to stay local, that adds a lot more red tape, and I would talk to the professionals in your area.
There's the evolution of land trusts. I don't know about the rest of the country, but I know the state of Maine, there's been an explosion of land trust over the last 10 years, and it's still continuing. And that, I think, is a source worth investigating through their probably statewide network that they have. I don't know which state you're from that way, or what you're looking at geographically, but that definitely is something that's growth in my view.
Absolutely. The Guild is working on building deeper partnerships with land trusts all over the place, because it is their whole mission and purpose to do conservation work on land, and they often don't have huge staff. There is usually a statewide coalition of land trusts within a state. So you can Google those things, or maybe you just know of one. They often have conservancy names. So like in Wisconsin, there's Driftless Area Land Conservancy and Mississippi Valley Conservancy. And so they might not have land trust in their name, but you can find them either through the state's umbrella organization or through Google searches on land trusts in your area. They always need help, and from all different angles, on the ground, for fundraising, for communication, like all of it, all the time. So I'd like to cover a couple more points. I'm conscious of the time. We're about 2 minutes to 9 Eastern. Okay, if we keep going for a little bit, maybe 15 minutes. If you need to pop off, you can. I'm
I
seeing
could hang
some.
for a little bit longer, but it is kind of getting a little late for me, so I
Absolutely,
do
it is
need
late.
to head out soon.
I would concur. I have animals that are on a schedule more than me, but
Okay. Well, a couple of these others could be answered if later we visit this shared doc and put information in. For example, do forestry schools provide info on the numbers of students and jobs that are likely available? That's probably a different answer across the country, but the Guild could work to tap this question with some of our faculty advisors and folks who work in the schools and perhaps populate more on that one. And then the specific question around postdocs and PhDs, folks not really interested in being a professor, but having done all of this work kind of towards that end, if you're talking about a Big Ten university. But for community colleges and smaller universities, where maybe you don't have to do research forever, just a question around, is a postdoc really absolutely necessary in order to get your cred, or is skipping out on a postdoc okay as a PhD student who doesn't necessarily want to teach and do research?
is someone who's on the call write that one? Do we know?
Doesn't look like it.
Okay.
I can find who wrote it though.
Well, it doesn't. I don't know if it mattered. I'm just that that whole PhD thing is very interesting with the postdoc. I mean, yeah, it's that whole Western academic paradigm of necessity and I don't know. I mean, it gets, that's why I wanted to ask with ask the person, like, why did they go after that PhD? And so what would that postdoc, provide for them that the PhD didn't, I guess would be, that's why I kind of wanted a little more detail on that.
Is there anyone here that has their PhD and has done a postdocs? Because I can't speak to that question because I'm not experienced in that.
So I have a PhD and I just got it, which is crazy, insane.
Congratulations.
And yeah, no, 2 years to do a PhD. It is insanity. And I had an opportunity to do a postdoc. And the only reason why I was going to do the postdoc was for the money, because it paid better than what I was trying to do. And then it just didn't, it wasn't, again, I didn't want to keep doing the research because I actually didn't even want to do the PhD because it was research, but I was encouraged to do it because it would benefit the nonprofit that I worked for, and did it. Yes. So I mean, I'm glad that I did it from that perspective, because a PhD, having initials after your name and you try to get larger grants, it helps, because as my advisor said, you can speak their language. But so it was a different reasoning for why I went to do it. But it also really puts you into a category that can also be challenging if you don't want to do the research, you don't want to work at a Big Ten. So I guess that's what I was trying to find out, is why did that person get the PhD in the first place, kind of a deal. It's really that background information. It's pretty grueling. I wouldn't recommend it for, I mean, it's really tough. And then you really need to be passionate about what that PhD is. And then you need to really be passionate about that postdoc, because it's more research. And I've been working with someone on a postdoc, and I'm not sure that it really worked out for them either. So it's just, it's a hard question to answer if you don't have that person there to get a little bit more of that background information. So
Well, thank you, Tish, for that.
it's nebulous, but sorry.
That's okay. I put some links in the chat. I would encourage all of you to check out the Guild's events. There's some student-centered things coming up more next week. We're going to hear from a Guild student chapter, mostly undergrad students, but I think there's a couple graduate students in that chapter. They talk about some of the activities they do in their community and the connections they're making there. And then there's a really great virtual retreat coming up that starts next week and really leans into this idea of like, how do we define and experience our relationship to forests, and how have our cultures and religions and so forth influenced that as well. So maybe not a direct line to an internship, but a worthy conversation and exercise as you're considering your relationship to forests and how you're going to engage that in your career. So I'd highly recommend that virtual retreat. You don't have to be there for every session. It will be recorded. And then there's other events going on that are pretty pertinent right now to the life and times. And if you're a Guild member, even the free student membership, you can join all of these, even if they're member-only events like this one coming up this Thursday and Friday on the future of forest stewardship, and just kind of a Guild conversation around what's going on right now and what does that mean. Students are welcome to that if you're members. And then there's also a jobs link that I put there, and it is sometimes more robust than others, but we post jobs from a ton of different partners, and we post our own jobs there. So it's worth keeping an eye on, and it goes everywhere from we need a technician to help with monitoring to we need a full-on red-carded prescribed fire burn boss or executive director for an organization nationwide. So it's worth taking a look at those job links on a regular basis. And then the middle link I put there is the join link. If you do want to join the Guild, membership's free while you're a student, and at least for the first year after you're out of school if you have not found employment yet. So other than you'll have a lot of resources to sift through and people to meet, and maybe you don't feel like you have time, I think that's probably the only downside. I welcome you to consider being part of this community and tapping into some of these resources. Any last comments from anybody on the call before we break? And I will share this recording later on.
I've enjoyed the conversation across generations.
Yeah, it's been great. Thank you for organizing it, Colleen. This is really super.
Thanks.
If anyone wants to catch up, just feel free to reach out.
We will do more of these, and just so you know, the Membership and Policy Council of the Guild is also actively working on how can we support some not super terribly rigid and formal job shadow opportunities between Guild members and professionals in the field and in the Guild. So stay tuned for that as well. Certainly you'll hear about it if you're a member, but we're trying to support in that way as well. Thank you so much for spending time this evening with us.
I just want to mention real quick, I put my email in the chat in case anyone wants to reach out to me directly. I'm happy to give feedback, spitball about ideas on opportunities, and just be a support resource for y'all.
Thank you all so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Bye all.
Thank you. Thanks for being here.
Bye, everyone.
All right.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.